Well, howdy, y'all. Welcome to 2025 and episode number 96 of Once Upon a Time in Texas. I am your host, Michael Mitchell. As always, I want to hit on a few random things, random crap as I like to call it. As y'all know, I've been off for a couple of weeks, off the podcast anyway. Just took a little breather, and to be real honest, I was kind of considering shutting it down just because it does take some time. However, as I mentioned it to probably about a dozen people over the Christmas break, they went, "Oh man, don't do that. We love it." I went, "Well, gosh sakes, I wasn't sure anybody was listening to it except for a few folks." But anyway, so I'm going to keep it up for a while longer because people seem to like it and like to hear what I have to say. So anyway, I was off, so we started it off with, first and foremost, we had our Order of the Arrow weekend out at Camp Perkins, where my son, he had been voted into the Order of the Arrow, which is the Boy Scouts of America, or Scouting America as it's going to be called soon. It is the Honored Campers Society, and it's all Native American themed. And he was not able to go through his ordeal back in the spring because he was sick with the flu, which sucks. So anyway, we went through, he got his ordeal. So now my entire family is involved with the Order of the Arrow here. It's Wichita Lodge 35, oldest west of the Mississippi. Then we leave the ordeal, me and my daughters leave the ordeal about an hour early and headed south. Went down to Arlington to it was the Texas Credit Union Auditorium. It's a beautiful place to go see Coulter Wall in concert. Coulter Wall is a Western singer, country singer out of Saskatchewan, Canada. And he's got a really cool voice. My girls just love him. And I do too. I think he's a great musician. And so we went down and saw him in concert, and it was amazing. Drove home. Then I took my adopted daughter, went down to see her biological mother, who was not doing well health-wise. She was at a facility down just west of Dallas. Went down to see her, more or less for daughter number 2, as I call her, but our adopted daughter, to kind of say her final goodbyes. And, she did end up passing after Christmas, a few days after Christmas. So it was good that we were able to slip away and go see her and say those final goodbyes. But then we get into Christmas, and about 2 days before Christmas, the 2 days before Christmas, my parents call, and they both got the COVID. My father's a doctor, and my mother had been helping in his office quite a bit, and they both caught the Rona. And so they ended up having to stay home throughout Christmas, which, kind of sucked. But, me and my family were fine, so we went to Oklahoma City and saw the rest of the family. My little sister and nephew flew in. They changed their stuff to fly into Oklahoma City instead of Dallas. And so they stayed up there for a few days and, made it happen. And then we were able to do Christmas with my folks a few days later, once they were outside of the danger zone, I guess, for getting everybody else sick. Then I know I've talked quite a bit about my oldest daughter, Lorelei, her Eagle Scout project. It's done. So we can put a pin in that. The project was moved. It's set up. It's painted. We got everything done. Even the plaque. An Eagle Scout buddy of mine has a water jet machine, and he cut out a plaque for us. And it looks great. And here's the coolest part about everything. Is that another friend of mine who's involved with Cub Scouts with his son, who is also a Rotarian, calls me up and said, "Bro, my brother got my middle son a bow for Christmas, like bow and arrow." And I think he thought it was more like a toy thing, but it's a legit compound bow. I don't know where the hell to go use it. And I said, boy, do I have a deal for you. So my daughter ended up going out and showing him kind of the ropes on archery and what she knew. She is not a huge fan of archery, but she sees its value. And anyway, so the first person to use her archery stand eagle project was actually a Cub Scout from our area that got an archery kit for Christmas. I mean, you can't make that up. That's just so cool. Then we decided that we wanted to go for a walk out on the Wichita Bluffs trail, and my good buddy and local city councilor, Mr. Michael Battolino, calls me up just to say, "Hey, what is up with your podcast? I'm going in withdrawals here." And I said, "Well, dude, I took a couple of weeks off," and he goes, "Well, I need some Mike Mitchell time." And I said, "Oh my gosh, you're so needy." It's not exactly how the conversation went, but it's my podcast, and he's not here, so I can tell it the way I want to. So anyway, I told him that my family and I were going to go walking out on the Wichita Bluffs Trail, and he said, "Oh my gosh, I love that area. My wife has to go into work, later in the afternoon for a couple hours. So it's just me and the kids, and he's got 2 younger kids." And he said, "Do you mind? We'll go out walking with you." I said, "Sure." And we went out and just had an absolute ball. His kids cracked me up. His son is still in diapers, and apparently he decided to fill his diaper on our way back, which meant that Mr. Michael Battolino was downwind of his son all the way back to the trucks. And so, I reminded him that's fatherhood for you. And someday he will miss these things, but not today. So anyway, so we've got weather coming in too. We're supposed to have somewhere between a dusting and 1,000 inches on Thursday. The weather models are still kind of all over the place, but we went from having, them predicting 6.8 inches of accumulation here in Wichita Falls and higher down around Waco, to the next day they were like, "Wow, now it looks like it's all going to miss us," to another 12 hours later, and they're like, "Ah, crap, we're back on. Looks like it's going to hit us." So who knows, but it does look very likely that right here in North Texas and a large chunk of Texas, it looks like we're going to get some snow for sure. And so it's like, whatever, bring it on. We'll put the one snow plow that we've got in our entire county to work. Rest of us will just get out with our old shovels, and or as we call them, wheat scoops. We don't call them snow shovels here. And so, we'll just live with it. It's whatever. And then finally, this one's kind of a tough one. I am going to tip my hat to a good dear friend of mine that recently passed away, Mr. Herb Griffin. Herb was the minister that married my wife and I back in the day, but me and my family and him go way further back. He was in my father's Army Special Forces unit back when I was a kid. Just did lots of cool things together. Ended up, I guess, moving over to the Navy and did 30 years of service, or over 30 years, I'm not sure, including being like the third head cheese in charge of the Naval Chaplains Corps. His final assignment was the head chaplain at Walter Reed. Just really an incredible guy, but he had been battling cancer for quite some time, and finally got to him this last Sunday. So for those of y'all hearing this, if you don't mind, I know most of y'all, probably none of y'all, have ever heard of Herb Griffin, but I promise you, you would have liked him. So if y'all don't mind, if you're the praying type, just say a little prayer for Herb and his family, and just know he was a good dude. So that's what I'll say about that. So Texas is iconic, and most icons that stand out here in Texas are, of course, cowboys, boots, hats and pickup trucks. And, you know, that's what people think about. And then some people think of barbecue and campfires, and other people think of hunting and all that. But what about horses? You know, people think of horses and all that kind of stuff, but people usually tend to forget about, of course, cattle. So let's take a look at some of the cattle breeds history here in Texas. And I know this may not sound terribly interesting, but hang on, just kind of hang with me, because there is, of course, the Texas Longhorn, and I don't mean the mascot for University of Texas. I mean the actual cow, Texas Longhorns. There's also some other breeds, of course, Herefords. Lots of people know Herefords. And Angus, which is actually written down a little different in the stuff that I found. So let's talk about a few of those, because one of those is actually very near and dear to me, of course, because it's my podcast, but also to this area in North Texas, and I don't think most people know about it. So before we jump into it, I'd like to thank our sponsors. Of course, that's me and Victory Home Loans. I know there are tons of people moving to and in Texas and Oklahoma, and I know a lot of y'all out there on the old interwebs do too. So let me help them out. I am an independent mortgage loan originator, and so I'm able to shop, 25 different plus lenders to really find the best deal. And we don't do just homes. We can do land, and I believe with the one we can also maybe look at doing cattle. So if you're interested in investing in some of these cattle breeds we're going to talk about today. But we can also do refinances, reverse mortgage. Pretty much we can do just about all of it, including investment properties. So why not work with somebody like me who's at least a little bit entertaining and really works hard to make that process faster, cheaper, and easier. If you know somebody, hook them up with me. Send them on over to my website, themichaelmitchell.com, THE, michaelmitchell.com. And remember, when you work with me, I sell dreams, not mortgages, because who wants a mortgage? So where did this week's idea come from? Well, I was looking at some stuff a buddy of mine sent me. A buddy named Jacob Campbell, who lives in Aberdeen, Scotland. And I met him, of course, through Scouts. And I've kept up with him through the old Facebook. And that, of course, as things generally tend to do. Well, first off, Jacob, thank you for sending me the stuff. He's been looking up stuff to present to my daughter, or my oldest daughter, I guess, for her Eagle Scout project, because that's a big deal. And even though they don't have Eagle Scout in Scotland, they have something similar. It was the Queen's Scout, and now it's the King's Scout. But anyway, he was looking at some stuff, and I don't know, just through our conversation back and forth on Facebook Messenger, that sent me down, of course, a rabbit hole about Aberdeen, because why not? It looks like a cool town. I want to visit it someday. And thanks to the old Google, I found all the information that I was looking for and a whole bunch that I wasn't looking for. But Google is pretty amazing, right? I mean, it just, kind of sends you down that way. And anyway, while surfing my life away, and it was honestly like 10 minutes, something popped up about Aberdeen Angus cattle. And I thought, do what now? Because I knew about Angus, but this one was very specific. It said Aberdeen Angus. So now Angus cows are big here, and so are Brangus, which Brangus is a cross between Brahma and Angus, which we used to raise years ago. But I hadn't heard specifically of Aberdeen Angus. But then I got to thinking of my childhood, and I remembered there was a monument north of our ranch about the location of the first Hereford cow stepping foot in Texas. And then that got me thinking about Longhorns, and well, hell, here we are. Y'all see how my mind works, okay? So we're going to go ahead and jump into this podcast of mine. Y'all are going to learn a little bit about cattle, because that's what I want to talk about. All of this information this week came from tshaonline.org. That's the Texas State Historical Association. tshaonline.org is an amazing place. They've got so much cool stuff about Texas. So let's talk about Herefords first, okay? The success of the Hereford cattle breed. And if y'all don't know what a Hereford is, That's the big brown cow with the white face. It's the easiest way to describe it. And they're not like dirt brown. They're kind of this reddish, kind of gold brown. Anyway, the success of the Hereford cattle breed in Texas was instrumental in the disappearance of Longhorn cattle as a major range breed. Herefords also proved better adapted to the conditions of the open range than were Shorthorn cattle, and eventually replaced that breed also as the dominant cattle breed in Texas. Hereford cattle probably originated from wild aboriginal animals known to be in the Herefordshire area of western England as early as the 5th century. Y'all don't know what the 5th century is? That's 400. Not 400 years ago. It's 400, like 1600 years ago. So there are several different stories about how these cattle developed into the modern breed of Herefords. One version has it that the wild cattle crossed with red animals from Yorkshire and white-faced animals from Holland. It is also possible that white Welsh cattle bred with the Herefordshire stock. The cross produced a superior beast of burden that fattened at an early age and had excellent milk capacity, all of which was important, right? Herefords as a distinct breed with the basic distinguished characteristics of today were established by the last quarter of the 1700s. The modern Hereford is colored dark red to red-yellow with a white face, crest, dewlap, and underline. Herefords with white flanks and white maskings below the knees and hocks are also common. Mature males weigh up to about 1,800 pounds, while mature females may weigh in about 1,200 pounds. Those are pretty big cows. The first Herefords were introduced to America by Henry Clay in 1817 when he brought a cow, a heifer, and a young bull to his Kentucky farm. They were bred with shorthorn cattle to avoid inbreeding, and in subsequent generations the Hereford characteristics were gradually lost. The first breeding herd was established in New York when William H. Sotham imported 22 head of cattle. In 1876, though, some of the first Herefords to arrive in Texas were brought in by the E.F. and William S. Eichard brothers of Henrietta, Texas. That's right, folks. That's where I grew up. And actually, the monument where it says the first Hereford set foot in Texas was only about 2 miles north of my parents' small ranch out there. Anyway, they purchased 10 animals at the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition, shipped them by rail to Denison, and then trailered them to Henrietta. That's correct. Back in 1876, and this was the story I was told, they were put in a trailer and hauled by horses back to Henrietta. Unfortunately, all but one of these cattle died. The Eichard brothers ended up buying others, including some animals from the royal herd that bore the brand of Queen Victoria. Also in 1876, J.F. Brady of Houston bought a bull from William Powell of Beecher, Illinois, but we don't count him because Henrietta's got it. So, yeah, apparently they were brought in. They were put directly on the train, so they never touched foot. And then they were unloaded from the train in Denison into a trailer, so they never touched foot in Texas yet. And then trailered all the way. And the story is that they went out there on the ranch, put the ramp down, and let the cows out. Now, I did not hear that all but one of them had passed away, but that's in here from TSHA Online, so I guess it's true. But there was a monument set up out there about 2 miles north of my parents' ranch. And I think somebody ran it over at one point. And I don't know. I think it's been removed anyway. And but I remember seeing it when I was younger. And I don't know what happened to it. I guess maybe I ought to talk to some county friends out there and see what the heck happened to that marker and tell them to go put it back up. Because I think that's pretty cool. Because, I mean, to be honest, we're not that far. I mean, we're only where my parents live. We're talking 15 miles or so from the Oklahoma border. So we're way North Texas. And so to have these animals brought in and then shipped by train. That's a big deal. So anyway, Henrietta, Texas, where the first Hereford, and actually not even Henrietta, Texas. It's actually out there. It's called the Eichard community. And that's because it was the Eichard brothers ranch out there. So anyway, later on, Charles Goodnight of the J.A. Ranch of West Texas attempted to breed Durham or Shorthorn cattle, but found that they were not suited to the environment and instead switched to Herefords. He introduced Herefords into the Panhandle in 1883, 6 years after they did in Henrietta, when he placed 20 registered bulls on the J.A. Ranch. In 1884, he imported 40 bulls from Herefordshire. He encouraged other ranchers to experiment in crossbreeding, and between 1882 and 1888, several thousand Hereford bulls were trailed in from Dodge City to the Panhandle. In 1897, Christopher Columbus Slaughter began to stock his holdings with purebred Herefords. About 1900, Robert J. Kleberg experimented with Hereford bulls on the King Ranch in South Texas. These experiments were instrumental in eradicating the menace of Texas fever. In the late 1890s, Warren Gammon and a small group of Midwestern Herefords breeders developed a polled or hornless Hereford, beginning with 13 animals that had mutated to be naturally hornless. These breeders formed the American Polled Hereford Cattle Club in 1900. In 1947, this group changed the name to the American Polled Hereford Association. Headquarters were in Kansas City, Missouri. In the early 1990s, the Texas Polled Hereford Association headquarters was in Rio Vista, Texas. At that time, there were about 180 polled Hereford breeders in Texas. The American Hereford Breeders Association was formed in Chicago in 1881 for the purpose of registering purebred Hereford cattle. It became the American Hereford Association in 1934 with headquarters in Kansas City. The Texas Hereford Association originated in San Antonio during the International Livestock Exposition in 1899. In the early 1990s, there were about 150 Hereford breeders in Texas. So how about that? We have a long history with Herefords, but if you're watching some of those old Westerns and it shows that they're pushing a lot of Hereford cows, well, basically that's movie magic. Because we didn't have Herefords here until 1876, which I guess was about the time, but we didn't have thousands of them. Mostly what people were driving north were Longhorns. So think about that. All right. Next, we're going to move on to Aberdeen Angus. So Aberdeen Angus cattle originated from the polled or hornless black cattle in Scotland that were recorded there as early as 1523. Two types of polled black cattle from the counties of Aberdeen and Angus in southeastern Scotland were crossbred. And over the years, the Aberdeen Angus breed was developed. Hugh Watson of Keilor, Scotland. I think I'm saying that right. Probably not, because Scottish say things weird. Keillor. I'm going to call that Keilor. It's probably something way different, like Bob's. But anyway, so Keilor, Scotland, has been credited with the movement to upgrade and promote the breed, which was prized for being able to range well on grass and withstand the dramatic weather changes of the Scottish climate. The breed is characterized by its short black hair and large size up to 2,000 pounds or more. That's a big cow. The cattle are hornless and in crossbreeding tend to produce polled offspring a majority of the time. Aberdeen Angus cattle do well under range conditions and are generally hardy and disease resistant. They are noted for producing choice beef, and the beef industry has touted Angus beef for its high quality and flavor. Sorry, guys. The first Angus cattle imported to the United States arrived in 1873. Scotsman George Grant brought in 4 bulls to his ranch in Victoria, Kansas. He showed 2 of them to the Kansas City Fair, and this generated much interest among ranchers who wanted Aberdeen Angus cattle for crossbreeding. Soon, Aberdeen Angus cattle had been introduced into Texas. About 1885, rancher John V. Farwell may have purchased from the cattle firm of Findlay and Anderson in Illinois the first Angus bull to arrive in Texas. He pastured it at Buffalo Springs and crossbred it with Longhorn cattle. Interesting note, Buffalo Springs is also in Clay County, Texas, just south of Henrietta. However, I'm not sure this is the same Buffalo Springs, because I'm assuming John V. Farwell is probably what Farwell is named after, Farwell, Texas, and that's more over towards the Panhandle. So I'm not sure, but you know what? We'll claim it. Beginning in the 1880s, the XIT Ranch out in the Panhandle brought many Angus bulls to Dallam County to crossbreed with their Longhorns. Hundreds of Angus cattle were shipped to Texas in the last decade of the 1800s. The Texas breeders were among the first to use the cattle for crossbreeding, as the calves produced were generally thicker and heavier at weaning times. Around 1900, there were very few purebred Aberdeen Angus herds in Texas, but interest in the breed continued to increase. San Angelo rancher Sam H. Hill owned one of the largest early herds of purebred animals in the state, and Coss Berry of Meridian, Texas, also had a large herd. In the 20th century, Aberdeen Angus were favorites at stock shows, winning numerous grand championships. This breed has also done well in crossbreeding programs. During the first half of the 20th century, the Brangus breed, which I mentioned earlier, consisting of 5/8 Angus and 3/8 Brahma cattle, was developed, and in the early 1990s, Texas was home to 36% of all registered Brangus cattle. In 1938, the Texas Aberdeen Angus Breeders Association was organized, and by 1941, more than 250 breeders were in the association, with a listing of over 60,000 head of cattle. In the latter half of the 20th century, the breed continued to grow in popularity. In 1995, more than 1,200 members and registered breeders in Texas were affiliated with the American Angus Association, of which we were members for a while. Its Texas office, the Texas Angus Association, is located in Fort Worth. So, yep, we were part of the Angus Breeders Association for a short time because we had Angus and Brangus. So it's good stuff. Now, let's jump to the breed that everybody knows and loves, Longhorn cattle. The Texas Longhorn is a hybrid breed resulting from a random mixing of Spanish Retinto or Criollo stock and English cattle that the Anglo-American frontiersmen brought to Texas from southern and midwestern states in the 1820s and 30s. A few old-timers, J. Frank Dobie wrote, contend that both the horns and bodies of the Texas cattle were derived from importations from the states out of the Longhorn Herefords of England. But he was convinced that the Texas Longhorn was largely Spanish. Spanish cattle had roamed in Texas probably before the 18th century. The old-timers were probably right. Some cattlemen observed that not only the horns and bodies, but also the colors of many Texas Longhorns resembled the English Bakewell stock brought from the Ohio Valley in Kentucky. Criollo cattle are of solid color, ranging from Jersey tan to cherry red. Black animals are few and brindles rare. Spanish and Anglo cattle mixed on the small scale in the 1830s and after. But by the Civil War, the half-wild Texas Longhorns emerged as a recognizable type. They behaved like Spanish stock, but had an appreciable amount of British blood. Old steers, 4 years and older, had extremely long horns, and a large number of the animals in post-war trail herds produced the popular misconception that all Texas cattle had unusually long horns. In the 1880s, when the younger cattle were with improved blood were trailed north, the average horn spread was actually less than 4 feet. So they weren't super long in the horn, but the name stuck. In the 1850s, Texas Longhorns were trailed to markets in New Orleans and California. They developed an immunity to Texas fever, which they carried with them and passed on to herds on the way. That's unfortunate. In 1861, Missouri and eastern counties of Kansas banned Texas Longhorns, and during the second half of the 19th century, many states attempted to enact restricted laws in an effort to fight the fever. After the Civil War, however, millions of Texas Longhorns were driven to the market. Herds were driven to Indian and military reservations in New Mexico and Arizona. And in 1867, Illinois cattle dealer Joseph G. McCoy arranged to ship cattle from Abilene, Kansas, which we've talked about before, to the Union stockyards in Chicago. Over the next 20 years, contractors drove 5 to 10 million head of cattle out of Texas, commerce that helped revive the state's economy. Longhorns, with their long legs and hard hooves, were ideal for trail cattle. They even gained weight on the way to the market, which is crazy. After the buffalo herds were slaughtered and the Plains Indians confined in the late 1870s, private and syndicate ranches spread northward to the open range and the free grass on the Great Plains. Texas Longhorns, accompanied by Texas cowboys, stocked most of the new ranches. The trailing era made the cowboy a universal folk hero. I'd agree with that. The big die-up of 1886-87, together with the rapid spread of barbed wire fences, brought an abrupt end to the open range cattle boom, and with it the dominance of the longhorn cow. Fencing made possible controlled breeding, and with the end of free grass, it was economically advisable to raise cattle that developed faster than longhorns. By this time, ranchers had begun crossing longhorns with shorthorn Durhams, and later with Herefords, thus producing excellent beef animals. Because really, we don't want pretty cattle. We want cattle to eat. So as long as they're producing beef, there you go. And I've actually got some friends that say, you know what, the best way to be a vegetarian is to let the cow do it and eat the cow, which I love. Longhorns were bred almost out of existence by the 1920s. Only a few small herds remained. In 1927, the Texas Longhorn was saved from probable extinction by Will C. Barnes and other Forest Servicemen when they collected a small herd of breeding stock in South Texas for the Wichita Mountains Wildlife Refuge in Oklahoma. A few years later, J. Frank Dobie, with the help of former Range Inspector Graves Peeler and financial support from oilman Sid Richardson, who, by the way, gave a bunch of money and land to the Boy Scouts, which is Sid Richardson Scout Reservation, gathered small herds for Texas state parks. After the wildlife refuge herd had increased to several hundred, the Forest Service held annual sales of surplus animals. Cowmen at first purchased them as curiosities, then rediscovered the longhorn's longevity, resistance to disease, fertility, ease of calving, and ability to thrive on marginal pastures. Its growing popularity in beef herds was spurred by a diet-conscientious population's desire for lean beef. In 1964, Charles Schreiner III of the YO Ranch, which coincidentally I worked at during my internship from college, took the lead in organizing the Texas Longhorn Breeders Association of America, which maintains a registry in order to perpetuate the breed in a pure state. Since then, the number of longhorns and their use in crossbreeding have steadily increased, and their future appears secure. Since 1948, the official state longhorn herd has been kept at Fort Griffin State Park, which is now part of the Texas Historical Commission. Smaller longhorn herds have been located at various times at Possum Kingdom State Recreation Area, Paladero Canyon State Scenic Park, Abilene State Park, Dinosaur Valley State Park, and Copper Break State Park, which you can put pieces of cattle feed in your mouth at Copper Breaks, and they've got cows that will come eat them out of your mouth. So, and we actually had some longhorn bulls for a while. We had Brangus cows, and one year we had a terrible time with our first-time heifers, basically meaning the first time they had calves. It seemed like every other week we were pulling calves. They were having a tough time getting those calves out. And I heard that longhorn cattle, when they're born, usually are smaller in weight, but very narrow in their front shoulders, which makes them easier to be birthed. And I was able to talk my dad into buying some Longhorn bulls, and we bred them for a lot of years, and we never had to pull another calf after that. So I guess it worked. So what do y'all think? Let me know what other weird, off-the-wall, or interesting Texas history you'd like to hear about. I want to thank our sponsors again. That's me and Victory Home Loans. Keep in mind, if you know someone moving to or in Texas or Oklahoma, send them my way at themichaelmitchell.com, THE-michaelmitchell.com. I'd love to help them out, love making people smile, and love helping people getting into homes of their own. Thank you all for tuning in to Once Upon a Time in Texas. As always, remember, the stars at night are big and bright, deep in the heart of Texas. Y'all have a great week.